Yeah. Well, and I don't like the term senior, the way it's used in our world, because generally the corporate world is targeting more and more targeting seniors as consumers of services and products. I prefer elder, and we need to rediscover what that means in our society. And then the other question I have: how many of you know the movie Shrek? The scene where Shrek and Donkey are walking, and Shrek says, "Ogres are like onions." We have layers. There is a layer in me that is still the 19-year-old layer, and there are many other layers in me, and just to focus on the outer layer or one particular layer is damaging to any relationship at any age, right? We're all individual, complex beings existing in relationship with stories, existing in freedom. And that's why I resist these pigeonholing systems of thought that ignore the real and unique individual we all are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the definition of ageism, Robert Butler, 1968, I think, termed the phrase. I don't know if you guys have read the definition here. According to him, ageism allows the younger generation to see older people as different from themselves. Thus, they suddenly cease to identify with their elders as human beings. Ageism is a social attitude. It is a way of stereotyping older adults as being weak, frail, and feeble-minded. That again, for some reason, that's weird that it's 1968. You think that would be written again, but we're still carrying that definition for some reason.
But to be fair, we stereotype young people too. Oh, those skateboarders, blah, blah, blah. The labels are terrible.
Yeah. I have some things to say that support what has just been said, but I'd like to hold them back while I hear from some of the younger people on the screen, so that we can see both sides.
Well, this conversation actually reminded me of something Cora and I were talking about yesterday, where sometimes when you label something, then it manifests what that embodies, and maybe it goes beyond anything and becomes ironic in the intent. Maybe when people introduced the term ageism, it was out of care for wanting to show that we shouldn't discriminate, but maybe it ended up discriminating itself. And I think that, if the groups who are being addressed should be the ones defining how they would like to be addressed. And I think that's what a lot of the conversation is about today, but that seems to be a theme in so many different cultures interacting, and then the outside group labels it, trying to help, but they forgot to just ask in the first place how the other group wants to be addressed. So I think that if youth in their interactions with older adults, or maybe that vocabulary changes, I think that that would be a really nice step in the way of kind of taking these systems of thought out the window and trying to really view things beyond the unnecessary constructs.
Thank you.
Well, I was thinking of the article itself. I just found that I agree with Rudy and what he's saying about labels. And I felt that this study was kind of limited in scope because, of course, they even admitted it. It was just in Ohio. the participants were mainly white, and they were very, academically achieving adults that they were studying. And I just thought there's a whole culture component that's missing here, because there are different cultural attitudes to age and how we respect elders, as we call them, like Rudy said. And there's, even for myself, and in some ways, I thought there were some things that were good in here. It made me think, because I always think of myself as younger, and I'm dealing with a 96-year-old aunt who's in a care home. And in some ways, I do label some things on her because she's fragile. She's going through dementia. And it was only until I really got into understanding dementia and the solutions and how to communicate better with them that I understood that I needed to let go of some of these fragility concepts about her and to really respect her as a person, even in her dementia situation, and still treat her as a person and not as some fragile older woman. So it made me think about that. And then I looked at the Genealogical Society of America's Ageism First Aid online course they mentioned in this article. And it is an interesting course. And I thought the module 3 on respectful, effective, and appropriate communications would be something that we could, that we could probably all learn from, because I know I've learned a lot in the dementia solutions communication modules. It just is kind of interesting.
Thank you, Yukiko-san.
Yeah.
It's very insightful. I just wanted to add on this. My take-home message from this article is really attitudes predisposition matters to the behavior change. But at the same time, we cannot teach predispositions. We must enculturate them. So that go back to how you basically create the culture. We will teach, not necessarily teach, quote unquote, teach predispositions. So one of the things that we are doing this for this group is that how can we make it visible, that message that we want to spread out? How can we make it more visible, more sensible?
One more comment regarding traditional or indigenous communities or societies different from ours is that in our Western modern world, we tend to focus on the individual, where in a traditional society, the emphasis is more on relationship between individuals. Like as I said, we exist in our relationships. And so when I'm talking to my granddaughter, when I'm talking to a friend who is in her 50s, when I'm talking to a young adult who's starting a career, like it'll be different. I'm not in the sense that there is no me. I mean, there is a core me, but what matters in any situation is the relationship, right? And then the other thing I wanted to say that it's so deeply ingrained in us that young is good. So even saying that an older person is young at heart, and that's a good thing. I mean, some younger people are old at heart, and we call them old souls as a compliment, right? There is something really good and valuable about being old, and let's not be afraid to say that.
Great point.
I think that my biggest discontent with the way things are is the exclusion of young people from so many areas. In order to declare a war, how old do you have to be? Very few wars are declared by people under 60 years old. And it's because I think, well, I just leave that one hanging for a bit. The control of money, how much of that is held by people less than 18 or even less than 30? It's probably a very small amount. And the amount of leadership, people who we elect to be leaders, they are mostly ancient. There was, that was a defamatory word. But there was a politician in Ireland where they were not quite as strict. Bernadette Devlin, she was elected to the House of Parliament when she was 16. And she was brilliant. She just outshone all of, I think that's maybe why older people don't want too many young people. It's because they're so enthusiastic and they tend to be, you can ask a 5-year-old child to tell you why war is bad. They can tell you in 2 or 3 minutes. You go to I won't say 80-year-old, even a 50-year-old, say, do you think it's good for somebody to kill someone because of who their father was, or for something that someone else did? And there has been a discussion about it, and as I listened to it, initially people said, oh yeah, you shouldn't punish someone who's innocent and just their parents evil, or just their government, their president is evil. But then they said, oh, but then we probably couldn't have a war. And which is quite true, which is the reason I think we need people who see further into the future. I'd rather have them having more say in power, money, wars.
The twist that the article throws into the pandemic, like, I guess this, I don't know, I have a different kind of take on the care and ageism vis-a-vis the pandemic. I think it's interesting because the article talks about the social distancing and masks and hand sanitizers, that kind of thing. And across the board, I mean, we've been at it for about a year, and I see social norms bringing up to the surface, in terms of care facilities, in terms of respect for the elders. I think it's much, I think it as a positive way of looking at maybe government, hopefully government policies where these can change. So it's kind of a bit of a disruption from our perception of what the whole social norms. I think it'd be nice to see that after all this is gone by, we'll get some new ways of dealing with ageism and youth, and the way we value society, and the way we invest in what are the priorities in terms of the city. How do we run cities? It's very complex, and so that's kind of like still, the jury's still out there regarding what's going to happen. But it really brings it to the surface about how, because I've been involved with, during this pandemic, we've been like with the neighborhood house, with the peer counseling. It's amazing. Like, I've been getting a lot of kind of upswell in social programs, and to look after, like what's happening to your neighbor, what's down the street, like how do we treat each other. I think in a way, hopefully that gap will be less important.
Yeah, I'm wondering, thank you, Baruch. The article discussed about benevolent ageism as a potential risk to impede older people's autonomy and sense of independence during this COVID overprotections. What's your reaction? Like, did you notice anything? I wonder what was your experience, especially living in Canada, which they are such a wonderful job protecting elders, when it comes to prevention.
Well, it was hard because I couldn't see my aunt for over a year. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, I thought her dementia was a blessing, because even if we tried Facebook, she didn't understand. She didn't quite get what I was doing on the other side of the screen, and why I wasn't physically in her place. And I thought we did it's a really hard situation because I think we did a lot of disservice to our seniors, especially in the care homes, when we cut them back from the families. I mean, the families on this side felt really bad, but the other side too, because those who were capable of understanding couldn't just understand why they had to be separated for that long a time. And I know we were trying to protect them, but at the same time, were we overprotecting them in some instances? You know, so that did make me think about this in this article. It's true.
Thank you. I have a question. So back to relationship, how we can teach predisposition, but how to enculturate them. One thing, so one thing is about the media representation of senior. So one of the things that the article talks about, the other fields talks about, we treat group as a homogeneous, but we are diverse, aging process diverse. But unfortunately, there is not enough positive, let's say, aging process in the media representation. What do you notice from what are the things that you're getting from media that you think that we need more or we need less?
Maybe there's a bit of an answer in something that happened in Science magazine many years ago. A Canadian science is a very powerful, highly respected journal in the sciences. A Canadian professor published an article that said that white people are not those with the most intelligence. When you measure IQ, people from South Asia are rated on average higher than white people, and mixed race people down, and then black people down, lower down. And then people wrote back to say this is not true, that kind of study should be banned, and like that. And it went back and forth. It dominated every issue for about 3 months. And then an article came in that just killed it right in its tracks. It was written by a black man, and he said, all of this arguing that you're doing, I don't want to be treated like a Japanese person, for admission to university or whatever it is. I want to be treated as the person that I am, as an individual. If I have certain good points, strong points, I want to be known for that. And if I have some bad points, then I don't need to cover them up. And so it showed the way we put people into packets so easily.
I think that ties in with the media. Your comment, Keiko, about the media. It's really hard to find proper coverage or interpretation of the real situations. I watch RT, Russian television, which is kind of like an interesting media because I have no idea how that come about because it's out of Washington, and they really give you an alternate view of like what we're talking about in terms of like helping Africa. There was one documentary about how it's completely false. This whole thing, the NGOs and funding, and it just doesn't help the communities because we're robbing basically traditions. It's ridiculous. We're not helping countries like that. We're actually deteriorating their condition because their food security, their way of living, cultures, traditions are fine. We don't need to be there. It's like get out of in that area kind of thing. And anyways, tying back to media with ageism, I think CBC, like the local media, and does not too badly. There's a lot of stories about the care facilities, like actually too much in the media. All 90% of news nowadays is about how the care facilities, just get tired. Like called COVID fatigue kind of thing. And then of course there's social media, which is like weird because is that real media? That's kind of like the fake media kind of thing. So it's really all over the place, and it's hard to. Then the key factor I think is about policy. If somehow the public media or what the community is doing can translate into so-called, our local representatives, the MLAs, MPs are supposed to listen to the community and translate it into like Ottawa if the feds can do something. And I think that's a missing link, like politics that's fallen short. And that's another conversation. It's not, so it needs to be grassroots. At the end of the day, it's about grassroots. And
like what messages that we like to send out have to be authentic, obviously, but
I would like to recommend a movie. It's called I'm Not Rappaport. It was a play written for Walter Matthau, and he was not able to commit for a long run on the stage. So in the end, it was turned into a movie with him, Ossie Davis and Walter Matthau. It's not a pretty picture of aging. It's a very real. And these two older men in Central Park in New York, grappling with each other and with the world around them and trying to maintain their dignity and their individuality and their freedom. The daughter of Walter Matthau wants to put him into a care home, and he says, I'm not going there. That's kindergarten for old people. And he refuses. And he'd rather get in trouble in the park than maintain his freedom. And I kind of really identified with that. I'd rather live in an SRO downtown than in a care facility.
I feel like the care homes are kind of an artifact of a lot of these discomforts and preconceptions that we have.
Yeah, I have a friend in my Riley Park community vision who are in their 70s, 80s, in the community garden. We have people working there. And it's funny, this fellow, I'm not going to mention his name, but he does not, maybe it's like along Rudy, I shouldn't make him wrong, but it's like accepting that change, change more than ageism, right? Because change happens. That's a given. We're like what Rudy's saying, from day one, our bodies are changing, but he, for some reason, shuns away from seniors. I do work with seniors, and he's not in denial, but he's kind of like, doesn't like that. It's a subject that we don't want to turn the rock over, like examine, and fear of looking at it in a sense. Yes, I understand. I can be youth at heart, but at the same time, I have to be realistic. I am slowing down, and you know what? I'm enjoying slowing down. I have no problem. I'm really glad that life has given me what it is, and talk about dignified and elegant writers, poets. Leonard Cohen is a perfect example. Alan, you probably know some of, and the way he aged and he died. I mean, of course he's a genius. We're not all Leonard Cohen, but that kind of thing. It's sort of like celebrating that. The wrinkles, the limitations, the muscular the challenges, all that stuff.
When we were talking about media, I've been enjoying this mini-series documentary that's come out of Australia, and it's called Old People's Home for 4-Year-Olds. And in the documentary miniseries, the group of scientists and gerontologists try a revolutionary experiment by bringing 10 elderly care home residents into a classroom with preschoolers. With social isolation being one of the biggest problems for those in elderly care homes, the experiment will try to determine if the simple act will improve lives. And so you see the interaction of the young people with the older, and I've been watching it for at least 3-4 times now, and you can slowly see the changes in both their attitudes, the 4-year-olds' attitudes, as well as definitely the seniors' attitude. So that's been quite an interesting documentary. And so anyways, if you ever want to watch it, it's called Old People's Home for 4-Year-Olds.
Yeah, setting up the stage for that type of interaction to happen, it's so critical.
I'm going to send the names of 2 books to Keiko, and maybe she'll send them on to all of us. But Rudy is going to really enjoy the one, if he hasn't already, called it, it's called The Angry Century. And the reason it appealed to me as I was thinking about this is that we feel that we old people, including the older of us, we don't imagine what's going to happen to the world with global warming. But people in the younger group here, they're going to see it, and so it's very vivid for them. And so we older people, we can look back. And when I look back, I can see certain trends in policy and in warfare and in NATO, and in how the people in different categories, for better or for worse, handle each other. But this guy, Eric Hobsbawm, the Angry Century, he goes back a whole century. He's a historian, and he's been soaking himself in it. And you can see trends there which are bound to be followed into the next 20 or 30 years, if not into the next century. There's and the other book is Harari's book. All of his books are brilliant. The one that applies to us is the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century as we look towards the future. And that is, I'm still reading it, and it's brilliant, but it doesn't have the long trajectory of what's been happening, of what's been going wrong over a century, and which is not going to be turned around in 20 years or so. Just an ad for the books to see if you want to read them all.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, everyone. It was delightful.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Until next week.